be justified? Does waterboarding and sleep deprivation prove to be an effective intelligence gathering tool, or just a recruiting tool for groups like Al-Qaeda and so-called Islamic State? We're live for the next 20 minutes. Welcome back to World Have Your Say.
I experience.
People are going to want to know. Let's just say something.
Welcome back. Let me introduce you to some new guests who are joining us to continue this conversation. Peter Van Buren spent 24 years working in the US State Department, joins us now from New York. John Hawkins is from rightwingnews.com and joins us from Myrtle Beach in South Carolina. And Claire Algar is Executive Director at Reprieve in London. So many of you getting in touch with us from all around the world. We've got calls coming in from Malawi, from Germany, from Nigeria, Greece, South Sudan, Somalia, the list goes on. And lots of comments coming into us as well. Hearing here from Sadat on Facebook. What's the difference between the US and North Korea in terms of torture? Do you feel proud of what you've done? Andrew tweets, the tactics employed by CIA during interrogations were too brutal and could only produce questionable confessions. I want to put a question to you, Claire, which has just come into us from John from Cornwall in Connecticut. He called into World Have Your Say and he said 3,000 Americans were murdered, attacks in London and killings all over the world. If one life can be saved, then it is acceptable to torture. What would you say to John, who's watching right now?
Well, I don't agree with that, and I think that the Senate report which has come out backs that up. I mean, I guess what I would say is that one of the things that the report covers, which really affected me, was the treatment of Abu Zubaydah, who was considered to be a number 3 guy in Al-Qaeda and who was tortured horribly. He was tortured for 19 days, 24 hours a day, which I would have thought was impossible, but took place. And it turned out that it's finally, it's now been accepted he's nothing to do with Al-Qaeda. He wasn't a member of Al-Qaeda. He was an innocent. And so, if you're talking about saving one innocent man, it's not a question of saving one innocent man at the cost of lots of guilty men. The point about torture is very often that you're torturing innocent people, or at least in this case. The other thing that I would say to whomever wrote in and said, what's the difference between the US and North Korea, is that in this case, the US is looking at what it's done, which I think is a really powerful and impressive thing. And I would agree with, I was fortunate enough to see the beginning of the programme, and that point was made by Ravi and also by Mike, and I completely agree with that. I think that this move towards transparency is really positive and very strong.
Claire, let me introduce you to John Hawkins. John, do you think it matters if some people are tortured if eventually you get to the right person who can give accurate intelligence? Is that a price worth paying?
Well, first of all, I don't agree that anyone was tortured. And I don't agree with your former guests who think, I guess, we can go out and give these guys lattes and fluff their pillows and hug them till they give us information. We're being told that none of these enhanced interrogation techniques worked, but that's what we used, and we haven't had attacks since 2001. We haven't had any planes flying into buildings. Now, if we had, let's say 2 years ago, nobody would even be coming out with this report. They'd be asking why we're not using stronger methods. And last but not least, I'd also like to add that the reason they concluded that this was torture and the reason they concluded that these techniques don't work is they simply cut out everyone who disagreed with it. They didn't interview the CIA officers. The Republican Party had nothing to do with it. They kept the Bush administration out of it. They could have interviewed Cheney. They could have gone out and interviewed all these people in the CIA. They didn't want to hear someone saying the opposite truth. So I don't agree that it's torture. I don't feel bad about it. They killed 3,000 Americans. They deserve what they get. I'm not sorry for them at all.
John, before I get Claire to respond, and I'm very keen for you to do that, and Claire, I know you're equally keen to do that, I want to bring you this breaking news which is coming into us, that London airspace, all London airspace has been closed until 19 GMT. That's after a computer failure, we're told, by air traffic controllers. I'm hoping our correspondent will be joining us shortly to give us more information on that. So that breaking news coming to us here on BBC World News, that London airspace, all London airspace, has been closed until 19 GMT. Let's go back now to Claire Algar, because I know you want to respond to the points that John was making there. So feel free to have a conversation. Go ahead, Claire.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, you say you don't feel sorry for them at all, but what about the innocent guy? What about the guy who wasn't guilty of anything? I mean, is it okay to torture him for 19 days without stopping? And I guess the other thing that I found really interesting is if you read pages 40 to 46 of the report, it talks about not only the torture of this guy, Abu Zubaydah, it talks about the interrogator snapping his fingers and Abu Zubaydah getting up and walking over to the waterboarding table. It talks about him raising his eyebrows and Abu Zubaydah lying down on the waterboarding table. It talks about him being put in a coffin, him being put in a box that's kind of 4x4. But almost more interestingly than the actual torture that it details, it talks about the effect on the CIA agents. And it's saying that after 3 days, they're feeling really uncomfortable. After 5 days, they're choking up and crying. After 7 days, they're talking about transferring out of the unit. I mean, I think that the importance of the report, and you know, people are going to say that it's partisan, people are going to say it doesn't have enough in it, people are going to say it has too much in it, but I think that the thing that the report really does is it sets out what happened both to one guy who it turns out was innocent, completely innocent of anything, and the effect that that had on the guys who were doing it. And I think that that, at the very least, just closes the argument on whether this was torture or not, because it pretty categorically was.
John?
Well, I think it's very interesting that we cut out so much of the context of what's happening. You talk about him being innocent. Well, how many people has Obama blown up with a drone who were innocent? Instead of taking these guys in and interrogating them, we're blowing them into a fine red mist. Now, how many people were sitting around some terrorist who got blown up? Now, I'm not sorry he's doing that. We're in a war, and sadly in war, innocent people die all the time. We could go back to you know, the history of Britain. How many people died at Dresden who were probably nice, fine people? That's what happens in war, and I'm sad that some guy got waterboarded. I don't agree that he was tortured. I'm sad he got waterboarded and had a rough time. Unfortunately, that's what happens. We're in a war. There's people who are going to die. Now, and I can, again, I look at it and we can say it didn't work. How many planes have we had flown into our building since 2001? And how many of us would have bet back then that we wouldn't have had another major terrorist attack in America? I'm guessing most of us would have thought, I certainly would have, that we'd have had a lot of them since then, and we haven't. And I credit a lot of it to that enhanced interrogation techniques the CIA used, and I'm glad they did it. I'm very happy they did it because it means a lot of people are alive today who would be dead otherwise. I tend to think that anyway.
Is that argument is made quite a lot, but there doesn't seem to be a consequential link. And, you know, in the UK, we had quite a lot of terrorist attacks that then came to an end. And, you know, we initially made a lot of the same mistakes in terms of enhanced interrogation techniques and so forth. But actually, the way that it ended wasn't as a result of that stuff.
Claire,
anyway.
let me put this point to you. You're sitting there with a shot of Big Ben behind you. Would you think that it is okay for someone to be tortured if it gives information that prevents, for example, another huge attack on London? Some people would argue, John in particular, that you could get that critical information that would prevent a huge attack, which could kill hundreds, if not thousands of people.
The problem is that people who know more about this stuff than I do, and the prosecutor who was on the first half of this program, say that that's not right. And so the idea that we're even still having this conversation, I just think it's pointless. I mean, I think that the Senate report upholds the fact that it doesn't work. I mean, the other, you know, so there was the prosecutor, there was the interrogator. Both of them say that it doesn't work. You know, I'm not an interrogator. I'm not a prosecutor. I'm a defense attorney. So I, you know, or actually I run an organization that defends people. So, I mean, no, I don't think that one does that. I mean, I think another thing that I would say on this is that I think that the UK could do with carrying out an exercise akin to the one that the US has just carried out. Your former guest, Mike, the interrogator, was saying that one of the things that the US did was carry out this program with the help of third-party countries. And the UK was definitely up to its neck in the US rendition program. Reprieve currently acts for a guy who was rendered with his pregnant wife to Libya. And he definitely wasn't al-Qaeda. He was no threat to the West at all. He was a Gaddafi opponent. And he was rendered to Libya in 2007 by the CIA, but with the enthusiastic assistance of MI6. And so, you know, there were other players in this program who should also be looking to their souls and following the American example and having a proper inquiry as to what happened.
Claire and John, I want to introduce you to Peter Van Buren, who worked in the State Department, the US State Department, for 24 years. Peter, you've been listening very patiently, and I've seen that you've been nodding your head and shaking your head throughout. Please speak to John and to Claire and add your thoughts to the discussion.
Well, there are a number of issues here that need to be addressed, but the main one is why we're having this discussion at all. Torture clearly is not necessary, and it doesn't work. And that's not an opinion, it's history. The last time torture was effective was in the Salem witch trials, when witches or suspected witches were tortured to admit that they practiced satanic rituals. The United States has faced crises far worse, far more intense, and far more severe than 9/11. We went through a brutal civil war and didn't need a national regime of torture. We were attacked at the beginning of World War II by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor, and we didn't need a regime of torture. And I'll quick to point out that the Japanese never attacked again after December 7th. So the argument there falls apart. We managed to get through World War II and hold the Nuremberg trials and take other people to task for torture without torturing them. And so the idea that because of 9/11, the United States needs to abandon the values that have kept it in good stead for 220 years is absolutely silly. Torture doesn't work, and by shifting the argument to either that question or to the question of whether this is some type of partisan issue between the Republicans and Democrats, completely ignores the underlying fundamental issue. You defeat an evil idea, a bad idea, with a better idea. If the United States, as it has done, stoops to the level of brutality, of immorality, operating an offshore penal colony in Guantanamo, torturing people to death. If the United States continues to stoop to that level, then it does not present an alternative. It does not present a better idea. And in that sense, it allies itself with organizations like the Stasi, with North Korea.
Peter, we're getting lots of comments coming into us live as people watch all around the world to hear you three discussing this issue. We're also getting lots of videos sent in to us, and I want to pull this one up from Mohammed Al-Badri, who is an Iraqi student here in the UK. Let's take a look.
Hi, I'm Mohammed Ali Al-Badri, a London-based student from Baghdad. The partial publication of the torture reports may be a beginning for the public to start questioning human rights abuses, including the ones from our own intelligence service here in the UK, who have influenced the Americans, by the way, to withhold our involvement in this crime. Speaking from experience, my father was tortured for 6 years under Saddam Hussein's dictatorship in Iraq. Very importantly, prior to reviewing the CIA torture reports, the CIA continues its destructive involvement in the region, and that this is but a grain of sand from the deserts of human rights abuses by intelligence agencies like the CIA. It is therefore paramount to have the ethics discussion with charities such as Amnesty International, and that this brings the people responsible to the human rights courts in The Hague.
Well, that was Mohammed, who's an Iraqi student studying here in the UK. We were also sent this video this morning from Thafir Atta, who's in Iraq.
My name is Dhafir Atta. I don't think I was surprised when I heard the report. Torture has been used for a long time. Torture is used to gather information. Maybe that is the reason, and they're going to keep on using it. I don't think anything is going to change, especially, for example, for us in Iraq. It's been used for a long time, and torture has been going for as far as I remember.
Well, let me bring you more on that breaking news I told you about in the last few minutes, that London airspace has been closed until 19 GMT. Heathrow Airport has just tweeted, they're at Heathrow Airport, saying flights are currently experiencing delays due to a power outage at the National Air Traffic Control Service. It's affecting UK airspace. They're going to be tweeting further updates. We're trying to get our correspondent up at the time. Any more tweets, we'll bring it to you here live on World Have Your Say. Do stay with us.
No, talking about it. Let me say something. The atmosphere here is appalling. It's dark, it's dank, and it's suffocating.
They're fighting for the town and for what it stood for, and as well as that, they are Bashar al-Assad loyalists, and they're fighting, they say, for him.
We're approaching the spot where Mohammed Qatar was murdered. The men who did it showed no fear of being caught.
The Syrian army is declaring victory, but at what a price? Qusair is now destroyed.
French and African forces are poised to arrive here in the next week or so.
But can they protect everyone? This is a chronically unstable nation. The only currency that counts is fear.
It takes me months to find someone who will speak freely about how the protests are organized. At the beginning, there are regular demonstrations, and the footage shows both the police and the activists are restrained.
I'm here in Stockholm at the concert hall where this year's Nobel Prize winners receive their awards from the King of Sweden. Join us for their first TV discussion together. Our topic, the best kind of science is useful science. That's with me, Zainab Badawi, on BBC World News.
It is only 2 years since Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe won a landslide election. So why on earth is he calling another one now? And with Japan's economy now back in recession, will his gamble to get another mandate pay off? To find out, join me, Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, on BBC World News.
No, I absolutely... Talking about it. Let me say something.
Welcome back to World Have Your Say. Let me bring you this tweet, which has just been sent out by the National Air Traffic Control Centre here in the UK. The press office says it can confirm that a technical problem has been reported at the Swanwick Air Traffic Control Centre. That is causing problems for all of London airspace, which has been closed until 19 GMT. As and when we get more information on that, we'll bring it to you here on BBC World News. So many of you getting in touch with us about today's topic. We're talking, of course, about that CIA interrogation report, which was released earlier this week, and that rare CIA press conference which was held yesterday responding to the allegations in that report. Mahez in India has called and said, we're becoming so inhuman with poor regard for all human life. We're losing our humanity, and torture demonstrates this. Let's bring in Ali Latifi, who is a freelance journalist and joins us now from Kabul. Ali, give me a sense of what people are saying in Kabul. Are people surprised at what was contained in this report, and are people even talking about it?
As your guest from Iraq previously pointed out, people aren't very surprised. You know, there has been talk of these kinds of things in Afghanistan since basically the U.S. invasion in 2001. And we see it, for instance, with the treatment of Afghan civilians by U.S. Special Forces in provinces like Ghazni and Maidan Wardak. So for the actual public, there's nothing, you know, it just puts to print what they already knew, what they felt like they already knew. The president has been very adamant. The president, Ashraf Ghani, he was very angry. You know, he said that he wanted details on these inhuman practices, who was involved from Afghanistan, what happened to them, what were their names. He wanted this issue resolved as a way to restore their dignity. And I think the way that people are talking about this sort of goes back to the conversation that's been had on this program so far. One guest earlier said that Japan didn't attack the United States after Pearl Harbor, and they didn't use torture, but they dropped the atomic bomb and more than 100,000 people died.
So Ali, tell me, do people think in Kabul that this is really a recruiting tool for the likes of Al-Qaeda, for Islamic State militants, for anti-Western feeling, anti-American feeling? Is this just playing into their hands, this kind of report?
To an extent, yes. I think, you know, it's also very important at this time because we have, okay, so Ashraf Ghani responded to it and the Taliban responded to it. The Taliban said that this shows the true face of the United States and that these things are not limited to that time period that was discussed in the report. The other thing is that Ashraf Ghani just signed the BSA, the Bilateral Security Agreement with the United States, a couple months ago. The Parliament just approved it about 2 weeks ago. It will be put into law starting January 1st. And there are many people that are upset with that agreement because they feel like they haven't seen anything positive from the U.S. invasion in the areas where they live. They feel like the U.S. presence has brought on night raids, it's brought on drone attacks, it's brought on forced disappearances, it's brought on unsolved murder cases, it's brought on all kinds of hardship. So,
okay, Ali, do stay with us. I want to bring John back into the conversation. I want to bring you some more updates on this story coming out of London, that London airspace has been closed until 19 GMT. We understand that the UK's Manchester airport says it is unaffected. Its airspace is open. It's ready to accept any diverted flights. If you want to get the latest information on this, on Twitter is the best way to do it. If you follow at Nat's press office or at Heathrow Airport, you will get all of the latest updates, of course, as well as here on BBC World News. I want to go back to John now for a response to that. John, do you think that there is a real problem with evidence coming out of this torture, as it was described in the report, that it's a recruiting tool for the likes of Al-Qaeda and Islamic State?
I tend to doubt if it's a big recruiting tool. I'm sure a lot of people aren't happy about it. I wouldn't expect them to be. I think it was very foolish of them to release a report. I don't think there's any possible way it can help us, and it could conceivably hurt us. So I think it was a partisan, very foolish thing for them to do, to release it. I didn't think it showed a lot of good judgment. I think it showed that they were putting politics above U.S. security. I think if they were very serious about this report, they would have interviewed people from the CIA. They would have had Republicans involved. They would have had recommendations. I note that they didn't even have recommendations on this. And one last thing, I guarantee you, because they had lots of briefings, many of the people who wrote this report knew this stuff was going on for years, and they didn't say anything about it. Now they feel a little safer, and they're doing it for political reasons. I guarantee you Dianne Feinstein knew about everything that was going on in this report 5 years ago. Guarantee.
John, thank you. I want to bring you more news now on this information of the London airspace closed. I'm being told that Gatwick are not accepting any flights in or out of London. We understand that Manchester Airport in the north of England is accepting flights. It can take diverted flights. We'll bring you all of the latest here on BBC World News. Nuala McGovern will be with you in the next few minutes, bringing you live updates on the situation with London airspace. If you want to get updates, there's a BBC Live page as well, bbc.com/live news. But thanks ever so much for watching. I'll speak to you next week.
November